All right, thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, there was a data analysis phase, and I think this is what has really set us up to have a mutual understanding of needs and goals. Typically, our data analysis offering is not just an opportunity to sort of collect a bunch of information, but also an opportunity to give everyone a voice, to bring all the stakeholders to the table and help generate buy-in so that there can be a mutually understood set of goals. So sort of the high-level goal for the trust lands management system overhaul is really to serve the mission of trust lands management as a division, to maximize long-term revenue for state trusts through the sustainable management of state trust lands. So sort of the objective that would help meet that goal is, as part of this data analysis, was to create this vision of where trust lands management as a system could improve and could better support the goals of the division going forward. So a few strategies, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there's a lot of different components of a data analysis that help you sort of get to an actual roadmap for how you're going to get there. So the first one is really understanding the people, who's involved. And so this is really just a subset of the personas that were identified. So personas are sort of a broader, it's not a job title, it's not a job description, it's kind of what's your overall role in the system or in the division even. So like a bureau agreement manager has sort of a high-level view for a specific area. So they're sort of focused on forest management, for instance, sort of doing those interactions with customers and setting up sort of long-term agreements. A bureau specialist is going to have a little more deeper technical awareness, sort of focused on the details of specific agreement types or specific contracts that you might have on trust lands. Your field manager is more on-the-ground operations focused. A division or bureau chief might be more focused on strategy and vision. Finance lead is someone who's going to be interacting with everyone really and has broad responsibilities across all the bureaus, but isn't really diving deep into the details of how any individual piece of land is being used. They have sort of that high level, where's the money going? So understanding sort of everyone is going to have different priorities depending on their personas. So the next step is to really identify all of the tasks that everyone is doing. So we have a couple of different ways that we approach this, but generally there's a process of sort of bringing everyone into the room with a list of tasks that we've all agreed on and saying, okay, for different personas, what is something that you are doing really often? What is something that is really critical, even if you're not doing it as often? Where is there room for improvement? And this helps not only to identify what should be included or not included, but also the degree of sophistication. So something that a few people need to do a couple of times a year might be a little bit less sophisticated. Maybe you just upload a spreadsheet rather than having a direct database connection to bring in data. Whereas something that someone is doing every day, like there are cashiers in the system every single day entering checks in real time in large volumes, so that needs to be something that is very performant, very easy to use. So then moving up from, you have sort of the personas and the individual tasks, and you start to sort of look at workflows. So, for accomplishing a large task, like a land banking sale, for instance, you're going to have a lot of different personas involved, including internal personas, some of the ones that we already looked at, as well as some sort of customer personas, the land board. You have a lot of different stakeholders, so helping to understand who's involved and what all the different steps are, which other systems you're interfacing with potentially, what data needs to come in and out. And this is really helpful to come up with an estimate for what it's going to cost to implement these workflows, but it can also be a really important internal tool. So if you have a process that maybe isn't really solidified, this is a good opportunity to sort of bring everyone together and create an ideal vision for the future. How do we want to do this process going forward? Where do we maybe need to spend a little more time internally to figure out what we want this process to look like? That way, when we're building a new system, it supports, our ideal process rather than maybe sort of what we've been doing because that's what our old system supported, right? So it sort of can turn around the emphasis from, what we've been doing because that's what was possible to what do we want and how can we help support that. So the last piece of the analysis that I'm going to talk about is creating a high-level data model. So increasingly, sort of enterprise-level systems don't just exist to capture your information and to give you tools for your everyday job, but also as a store for information about everything that you're doing, everything that's happening on trust lands. So while, of course, ag versus minerals versus real estate versus forestry, they're all going to have different business processes, different people involved. There are common entities that we want to be able to roll up information on. So a huge part of this process is identifying what is shared and what is really particular to an individual process. So everyone's working on trust land, so that those tracts of land are really critical as a shared entity. Everyone has some sort of agreement, right? Whether it's an oil and gas lease or, somebody is renting storefront property from the real estate division or there's a timber sale. They can have really different sort of contract structures and payment structures, but they're all sort of an agreement between the state and a third party to use the land. So the last piece, and so once we had that understanding and responded to the RFP, then we can get to building, which does not mean that we were done with analysis. It's sort of a key part of the approach. Sarah alluded to the fact that there are multiple phases, and it's also, breaking it up into phases makes it a little easier to digest, but also means that there's opportunities to continue the analysis. So the data analysis phase sort of gave us a broad understanding of who needed to be involved and when and the relative complexity. But it wasn't I didn't disappear and come back to Sarah and say, here, we're done with the forest management workflows. It was a constant sort of feedback loop. So I'll highlight a couple of places where we actually learned as we went on this. All right. So.
Transfer over to that other screen.
Okay.
Yeah, with the other.
Do we have any questions you wanted to?
Basically, one of the questions that came in was how long did the analysis project take?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Sarah, you were actually more involved with the analysis than I was. I hadn't started yet, but I think it was a few months from start to finish. Does that sound about right, Sarah?
Yeah, and it was an intermittent thing where we would do a really intense day as a group, and then the contractor went away, worked on stuff. I think, so, off the top of my head, I was going to say about 4 or 6 months, but within that, it was just little pieces and parts.
Yeah, so that's typically how it would be run. Is there's a few intensive sessions where you're bringing everyone together, and then a lot of Sitka doing the analysis, pouring through the artifacts that have been provided, and sort of coming up with some ideas. Usually there'll be a few sort of core stakeholders who will be reviewing initial drafts, and then a bigger group of people who will be more involved in kind of like a card sort where you're bringing everyone in and having them prioritize. So, and it can go faster or slower, sort of depending on the capacity of the customer to engage as well. We're aware that most of you have full-time jobs that are not helping support the recreation of a software system. So.
And before you, this one might be better to wait till the end, but I'll just ask it and you can
Okay.
make that decision. But another question came in, is do you have ongoing support? And how much does that cost and how long do you think you'll need that?
Okay, so that's a good question. Montana's hosting their system themselves, so DNRC's IT division is actually the one who has all the infrastructure for the production version of the application. So that is potentially structured so that there wouldn't be a need for ongoing support. Right now, of course, we're still under contract and still developing, so Sitka is handling sort of the bugs that come up and just quick feedback, whereas the IT division is handling more like if users need permissions that they don't have, or sort of on-site configuration, but that would definitely be something that if you could host it in the cloud or on Sitka's servers, and that would be something where we would have an ongoing support. So we can talk a little bit more about that at the end.